Okay. All right. I think we're on. Welcome, everybody, to another show. I have Tings and Marco with me, who you're going to learn a little bit about more in a second. We were lucky enough to meet in my brew pub not too long ago. Tings and Marco has a very interesting platform, Dongsheng News, which is reporting on a lot of the great stories coming out of China. And it was really refreshing to see because I think a lot of the great stuff that's happening in China sometimes gets kind of washed out by a lot of the other stuff that's going on. So it was great to see something that wasn't really political. And that's what I'm going to try to do today. I'm going to try to talk about some of the stories you cover without getting political, but that is like asking me not to itch a scratch on my back. So I can't make any guarantees. Scratch and itch. I mixed that one up, but I'll try my best. I promise. But before we go on, I think maybe what we can do is just you guys can introduce yourselves and it's a little bit about where you're from and everything like that, and then we'll go into your platform.
Sure. Thanks, Daniel, for having us on the show. So my name is Tings. It's Tengguan in Cantonese. I'm originally from Hong Kong, but grew up in Canada. That's why I have this accent. So we share a similar background, Daniel and I. So Marco and I, we moved here to Shanghai in the middle at the end of March. At the end of March last year. So at the tail end of the worst of the pandemic here, but as the world was entering the pandemic. So we just started, I guess, diving into news in China, about China, and learning a lot and realizing there's a whole lot of misinformation being shared about China. And so we started sharing some news about it. But Marco can also share more about where he's from and why he's in China.
All right. Sure. And before you were in Ontario also though, right? Tings before we,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I grew up 20 minutes south of where you grew up. So that's
yeah. So there's a problem that usually happens when I speak to Canadians. Now we're lucky enough we don't have really thick Canadian accents, but when I speak to Canadians, the Canadian accent starts to come out slowly and slowly more. So I don't know if this is just going to snowball from here, but we'll try our best to keep our
yeah. Let's do that.
We'll try our best on that too. And then Marco, you go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm Marco Fernandes. I'm from Brazil. I actually work with a few peasants cooperatives in Brazil, also in Argentina, doing a lot of organic food production. So I actually moved to Shanghai because they're trying to also establish a trade office here to do some small-scale farmers, peasants production and try to export to China. But also, I'm also a researcher in the Tricontinental Institute of Social Research, which Tings also is part of and head of the art department, right?
Yeah, really that's cool, what brings us to China.
Yeah.
That's the main thing. We had such a great long conversation when you guys were down in Shenzhen, and talking about some of the dynamics between Brazil and China is going to be probably something we talk about in a future episode. We've got a few different ideas of things we can speak about, but for now, what we'll talk about your platform. It was your year-end newsletter that really caught the attention of a lot of people. That said, this just beautifully summarized all of the kind of positive stories or the progress that China was making throughout the year. And like I said, it just cut through everything else. It said, okay, let's move away from everything else. These are the positives. So can you tell us a little bit about your platform, why you made it, what you're hoping to accomplish, and just a little bit more about how it works?
Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty, I guess, humble proposal of how we started doing this. You know, when we first came here, we have lots of friends living all around the world, started asking, hey, how's it going in China? You know, what's it like? Just from daily life stuff to trying to understand a little bit more about, politics, society, and just how people live. So we started reading a lot of news and then learning a lot about China, unlearning a lot about China. And so we started just basically gathering a summary of weekly headlines, reading into it, sharing that. And at some point we said, oh, why don't we just put this together? It's just started as an email that we sent to friends and people like that. Here are some headlines, things you might want to know about China, things you didn't know about China. And that kind of grew. I think we launched our first was it in May now?
May.
Yeah, first issue in May. We did it as a MailChimp, kind of just listserv, added some emails of friends, organizations we also work with. And that kind of grew into something I think matured over time. And so what you saw in terms of the end of year was probably the best issue we put up because it's distillation of 8 months of what we learned. And obviously there's a group of other people also looking into reading news, sharing content with us, and it's a pretty collaborative process. And I think what's happened is that the more we shared, the more people have wanted to know, hey, we want to know more about, I don't know, people's life and culture. We want to know more about issues about agriculture and environment. And we kind of accumulated a series of, there's definitely no expertise, but definitely some information that we think the world could benefit from knowing.
Yeah, and especially because, especially because also, as you were saying, I mean, last year, especially last year, there's so much like heavy political discussions and so much like conflicts, and as we know. But one thing that sometimes people miss is, okay, what are the facts? What are the data? What's going on in China? What is like economy looking like? What's people's life look like? So this is the kind of things that we miss, and especially people from Latin America or Africa was a big part of the audience coming from there. Even like very progressive people, they don't know, they don't have access to these informations. And because most of the press in Latin America and Africa, it's sort of filtered by New York, London, Washington. So of course, even progressive media sometimes can be very biased because of these visions. So our idea is like, okay, so let's tone down a little bit. Let's look to what's happening in China and with some facts, a lot of data. And then we can move on in discussion.
Yeah, that's a great service. I mean, because there isn't really one source like that where you can just kind of cut through everything. I mean, even on the China side, China, if you're a Chinese media news outlet, they're responding to the political aspects of things too. They're continually trying to debunk things. Then the other side, they're putting their spin on it. For example, if poverty alleviation, somebody gets a free house from the government, they'll go in and say, but we saw a picture of Xi Jinping on the wall. There's a dark side to this. Sure, he got a free house, but So there I go. I'm going too far. I got to pull myself back a little bit away from the politics. But what I'm saying is, it's great that you guys are putting something together where it just sits in the middle and it says, these are the facts. Like you said, this is what's going on. So you have your website. And the website, we'll open up a screenshot of that afterwards so we can see that. But that's at dongshengnews.org. But you also have a YouTube channel which puts some nice images together and things like that, that kind of gives people a really quick summary of what happened in the... It's weekly, is that correct?
Yeah.
Every week?
Every Saturday.
Okay, yeah. So how about we start by showing a video here of... This is the first clip that you sent me. Was that the year-end summary, or that was just a previous weekly summary from before?
It's a previous weekly summary, just to give a kind of good,
okay.
I think.
By the way, it starts with the housing issue. So
Exactly.
Okay. Exactly. Okay. All right. So I'm going to play that now to give everybody a little bit of an idea of what shows up on the YouTube channel. There we go. Beautiful. That's some nice work, guys. I really like that. And that's every week. Every week you've got a summary like this that comes up. And then, of course, people can go to your actual website to go into a little bit more detail, behind the stories and things like that. Look at the actual data. But how about from here, then, we move into some of the more notable stories you've covered or things you want to talk about in terms of what were some of the highlights or most important things, pieces of news, to, as I said, go a little bit deeper. So I've got a few different images here of screenshots of summaries. So you can start with whatever you want. And as you're speaking, I might pull up some of those images.
I mean, one of the we were thinking a little bit about what to share here, and there's just so many stories. And I mean, it's amazing the speed that, you know, Chinese society moves and how much it learns and reacts. So I mean, we had to scratch our heads a bit, but I think there's three key stories we think from 2020 that are really important to share. One is around poverty alleviation, and the other is around some social gains that were made, you know, for in sort of people's lives, uplifting the sort of majority of the people here. And then also environment, because I think that's something really impressed us this year. But from the poverty alleviation, I mean, we started with the video about housing. So, I mean, one of the headlines at the end of the year was that, okay, China achieved met its poverty alleviation goal. You used to have the image there, where the last 80 million of living in absolute poverty were lifted out of poverty. So, I mean, that's one of those numbers that you get. What does that mean, you know? Using Canada as a reference, is 35 million people. You just lifted almost 3 times that population out of poverty in 8 years. But in a larger context, what's really impressive is that in the last 40 years, they've uplifted 850 million people. And I think sometimes when we talk about China, it's like numbers that are a bit too big to understand. For context, I was trying to compare some different countries. 850 million people is the equivalent of 2.5 times the United States, or 4 Brazils. 4 Brazils. It's entire Latin America, Caribbean plus North Africa together. It's like way more than the entire Europe. So these are like human global scale contributions. And I think it was it the World Bank that actually came up, not necessarily friends of World Bank, but anyway. No politics, not too much politics.
Yeah, we're going to try our hardest.
Yeah, let's all try. It's that this 850 million contributed to 76% of the global poverty reduction. So that means that 70% of the world's people who have been lifted out of absolute poverty were done because of China's efforts. This is, I mean, it's just impressive. Like, I almost want to sit with that number for a bit and understand what it is. But going deeper into the news, you know, we read different kinds of stories and dug in further. And how has that come to be? It's not just throwing money at a problem. You know, it's actually a huge level of state planning and organization that goes into this happening. So what impressed us the most is, for instance, the amount of party presence there was in order to make this happen. So, you know, it's at every single level, from the very, very top to, you know, the township to the village level. You have dedicated actually party members going and oftentimes spending years living in villages and working in the communities, going door to door, knowing every single family. And we found this incredible. 3 million people in the last 8 years actually went. That means they leave their families, they go to very remote villages, and they work there until basically they can work with the community to lift that county or that village out of poverty. So that part around like the human capacity and the state organization has been absolutely impressive. And actually, one of the things, that really great documentary that Robert Lawrence Kuhn made, it was a collaboration. I think you mentioned it in one of your previous shows.
PBS with CGTN.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But of course, in the US, it was pulled off the air because it was, I don't know. Well,
it wasn't negative enough about China, but
exactly.
No, a lot of people, they definitely miss out on that piece of the story. And actually, something stands out to me because I watched a debate between Yanis Varoufakis and John Bolton. And Yanis was talking about China's contributions to poverty alleviation. And John Bolton, I believe it was this debate, where he was just like, well, yeah, if you look at the global numbers, the entire world is just improving so much with poverty alleviation. And Yanis had to correct him. He said, no, when you take China out of the mix, if you take China out of the mix, it doesn't paint a pretty picture. They have been doing the majority of this. And then so you get a suppression of a lot of this this information with, for example, the documentary being pulled and things like that. Yeah. And then the other thing, just before I forget, because I always forget when we're going through stuff like this. I watch the videos afterwards and I said, I forgot to mention this. But what you were saying about these people going into villages, that's a really important aspect of it too, because how they do it is important. I was talking to Jinjing Li, who did a lot of coverage on this. CGTN obviously did a lot of coverage on poverty alleviation. It's not just a matter of going in and giving people property or giving people money. There's a whole social system in place that talks about okay, well, how do you fix your house? How do you fix your roof if something is wrong? If you have this problem with your cow or your livestock, what do you do? Or social work aspects also, like you can't treat your children like this. You can't raise your children where you're, slapping them in the middle of a government office and humiliating them like this. Like it's basically a whole social reform. But even that, the most ridiculous twisting of that was, I remember in Xinjiang, when one of these kind of groups, these community helping groups, were going through and teaching kids how to brush their teeth properly. There was, I can't remember who it was, but anyways, he basically said this was a kind of colonization. It was diluting the cultures of Xinjiang, and it's like no matter what, there's always a way to twist this story. But it is a very important global story that people should know about. Not only because it's a great achievement, but maybe people can draw some inspiration from this and say, "Hey, okay, well, how did they do this? We're not necessarily going to copy it, to a T." But there's something to learn here, obviously.
I mean, I think that's totally right. One of the aspects you're saying, it's not just going in and just saying, okay, here's money or here's a house. That's the way that at least in China they frame poverty alleviation. They've actually added an element beyond just looking at income distribution. Like the World Bank says, according to the numbers, which is what's used internationally, is $1.9 per day is the threshold of absolute poverty. So actually, when you adjust it in China, they actually lifted that by 20% when you adjust it to the purchasing parity. So the actual purchasing power of the RMB is actually $2.2. So it's already higher, but they don't stop at that. They actually add a whole other level, is that they call it 3 guarantees, that you need the free healthcare, because they understand that poverty is not just an income distribution problem, but it's actually a social infrastructure and a kind of generational question of how people get lifted out of poverty. So there's free healthcare, free education, guaranteed education. Here it's 9 years, a mandatory free education, and housing security with safe drinking water. So those are not small details. I think when people come in and say, oh, this is colonization, you're destroying a culture, it's that the process of modernization means that cultures do change in some parts. Like when, for the first time, a community gets water or gets a house, descends from a mountainous area that has never seen electricity, never seen water, never seen, proper housing, that means there is a shift. But I think those are things that we can't dissociate from, the kinds of, human dignity and living standards we want for everyone.
Right. Yeah, for instance, like this housing issue, we saw the video. We published this article, and it was something that very interesting. I never thought about it. Is that okay? So they bring people from very remote areas, in the middle of the mountains, like hard to reach, etc., and bring people to like a community, like a few buildings. But then you have not only the few buildings, but you have a school, and you have a sort of like a health care, some small clinic. But one thing is that, okay, it's a problem for many people, of course, because you're like took out of your environment. You have your animals, you have your like rural life for hundreds of years, that family is there. But then if you look to the kids, okay, now the kids go to school because the school is just downstairs. Before that, the kids sometimes had to walk, 3, 4, 5 kilometers in the middle of the mountains. But many times they had to take care of the grandparents. So they couldn't go to school because the parents go to work. Who's going to take care of the grandparents? So it's like changes so much the life of the kids. We're talking about, I think, 10 million people.
Just under, yeah.
Yeah. But anyway, so this kind of things, but the people are, they're not in the environmental now. They don't have a job. Yeah, there are problems. They're trying to fix that, but also there's some gains for kids, for grandparents. So
and of course,
exactly.
That question is that it's also the kind of last resort too. It's not like the first
exactly
is to relocate. It's okay, how can we create jobs there? How can you change, restore the environment? Like we'll talk more about that, so that there could be small scale economies, there. People can start, doing their own agriculture, selling in e-commerce. There's many aspects of how to maintain and build the industry around a community first. But I think we're going off on a slightly different path. I think you wanted to say something here.
Oh yeah, no, just adding to what you were saying. I mean, with the schools and things like that, the I think I've got. Can you guys hear that? I've got my youngest outside the door. Yeah, I think he's telling me to come. Yeah, let me. So give me 1 second. Yeah, that was my 1.5-year-old. He knows I'm in here, so he's shouting for me to get my attention. So yeah, yeah. The Tibet. When I was in Tibet, I saw that firsthand also. So obviously it's a little bit more difficult in Tibet because everybody's so kind of spread out a little bit more. But what they did there was they had programs where every weekend, when the school week starts and the school week ends, there's free transportation, no matter how remote they are, to send kids into the school. Absolutely everything is free: the books, the uniform, the school fees, and the most important thing were the meals. So that was a big incentive for families to send their kids while they were still trying to lift their families out of poverty. Because like you said, yeah, the kids were supposed to be there to kind of help out with the families, but now they don't have to worry about that food that they have to supply to their kids now. And this was like kind of like, okay, all right, so go to school, because not everybody was valuing school the same way. And then in other communities there, it's also about connecting them to the rest of China. I saw, farmers being connected on platforms where platforms would help sell their products all over China, whether it be, vegetables or, cheeses or breads or handcrafts and things like that. The effort that went into this and how many people were sent around the country to take part in this is really spectacular, the scale that this was done on.
Yeah, I mean, with that, one of the stories we put in on your end too was actually a Harvard study that was looking at, I guess, the party approval between 2003 and 2016. And what was really interesting, I mean, a chunk of that, the tail end of that falls into this period we're talking about poverty alleviation, but overall, nationwide, it has a 93% approval rate. And what the largest section of that...
the Ash Institute from Harvard, right? Yeah.
Yes, that's it.
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. But the hugest growth in this period is actually in the kind of village and township areas. Like went from 43% approval rate to 70% approval rate. And of course, there's social welfare programs. I mean, this providing education, schools, access to schools, plus a meal. These are kinds of things that will increase the confidence of people in their government. But it's also fight against corruption, but also these kinds of poverty alleviation efforts and just presence in the communities. I mean, that's where sometimes I think when you read the Western news, it's almost like any day now, like people want to rise up and topple the government, but people are pretty happy. They're living some of the best lives they've ever lived in millennia, and they're getting
I think it's important to say also, meanwhile, the people in those countries who are saying that has people rising up trying to overthrow their government.
Exactly.
With what happened.
We won't mention which governments, but
with very weird clothes.
Yeah.
The fashion part is just appalling. But there's actually one other aspect you were mentioning about the Varoufakis that's quite interesting about what if you take China out of the global scale. I just want to go back to that point. Is that one of the things that UNICEF actually came out with a report at the end of last year, was that in the COVID era, just in sub-Saharan Africa alone, 50 million people got pushed into extreme poverty. And since the 90s, which is the period we're talking about where China really, uplifted 850 million people out of poverty, they've doubled in sub-Saharan Africa the number of people living in extreme poverty. So this is a hugely important global question. It's not the same methodology that can be applied, but definitely many lessons we should be open to learning about what China has done for the rest of the hungry and poor. I mean, in Brazil, that's a huge question, right? Where Mark was from.
Yeah, no, it's interesting because reading and learning about a Chinese experience, it's very strong for us in Brazil, because Brazil had a very big and important poverty alleviation program from more or less 2004, 5 until like 14, 15. That was actually the governments of the Workers' Party. First Lula.
Yeah.
Lula two terms, and then Dilma 1.5, because there was a coup. But anyway, it's another story. But what happened, it was Brazil had a very big progress on that, actually. But actually, what was the program was basically giving people money. which is okay. I mean, you're talking about like millions of people that now had something to eat. I mean, if you went to like a small villages in Brazil, it was like amazing what happened, even like with the local shops, because now people had a little bit of money and they could spend, could eat better, they could like have better clothes. So it was a very, very important program. But when you see that the China approach, it's so much sophisticated. Like it's a planification. I mean, every family has a plan. This is what you're talking about. The guys, the party secretary is in the village. He knows every single person. He knows the families. What are the problems? So you have what they call the target. They have this word,
Yeah,
right?
the target
The
population.
target poverty alleviation. So, I mean, I'm assuming that this could be a lesson for many countries in the future, because it's not only about giving money to people, but how do you plan the life of the people, and how actually also not only how do you alleviate poverty, but how you move on. This is actually the question right now. I mean, this is we can see
Yeah. You
this
know,
is what
one
the
of my hopes, one of my hopes is that China's methods are going to help in that aspect. Also, this is where we're going to dance a little bit around politics, though. So, you know, I guess we're not going to mention who supported the coup in Brazil, right? Well, everybody can make their own conclusion on that. But but what usually happens, you know, I remember seeing when Guyana, my mom's country, which is just north of Brazil, there that shares a border, they when they found oil off of their coast, this was back before I really understood geopolitical issues and how things move. I thought this is amazing. Finally, the people of Guyana will become wealthy. It'll become a more equal society or whatever. And of course, that doesn't happen. That's not what happens when you sign deals with these oil companies. Maybe a very few amount of people will become very, very rich, but that's a much cheaper option for these oil companies than using the oil to support the entire country. Like, say what you will about Gaddafi, I'm sure there's a lot of things we can criticize him for, but that's what he did when he nationalized the oil. He used it to create free education, free healthcare, all of these social programs. And in terms of poverty alleviation, I believe it was.
we're not going to talk about which country actually invaded and destroyed Libya, right? I'm not talking about that.
No, we're not going to mention that. I mean, it may have something to do with the same country that had something to do with Brazil, but we're trying our best here. That itch is really starting to, but I believe it was in Malawi where there was this big kind of famine and a lot of people died. And one of the guys broke ranks, and he said that when the World Trade Organization came in, one of the things they demanded was that we depleted all of our grain stock, because a lot of the systems rely on making sure that these countries more or less stay impoverished so that their resources can be extracted at very, very cheap prices. The WTO had these systems in place where they go into these countries and they say, if you don't already have food subsidies in place when we're coming in and cooperating with you, you're not allowed to do it. You're not allowed to put food subsidies in place or programs like this. Whereas when China's going into these countries, they're not coming with all of these kinds of political requirements or, this kind of a situation. It may not be a perfect system, but one of my real hopes is that China will take the spirit of what it has accomplished in China and try to spread this to the other countries that they cooperate with. And so far, by all evidence of not putting these extreme restrictions in place, and obviously by these countries voting to work with China rather than I almost said it. I almost said the country with China rather than some other countries. I'm hoping that this is where we could possibly move towards.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Also talking about this issue of how to move on the poverty alleviation, because this is the big debate now. I mean, China is just saying, okay, guys, we got it. No more extreme poverty in the country. What now? It's not enough. Of course not. Mm-hmm. So one of the things, for instance, that's very interesting, if you see some of the data that we're publishing this year and discussing, of course, education is critical. I mean, how do you move somebody? How do you have like a social gains or your change status in society? Most likely you need a good education. So for instance, if you go to see the numbers, between 2011 and 2018 in China, 70% of the new students at university, 70% was the first person in the family going to the university. I mean, I happen to be this also this person like that. I know a lot of us. It's the first time that somebody go to university. We know. I mean, what this means to the family, even symbolic. It's like, okay, we're getting better at least. That's so much struggle. But also it's interesting because if you go to the 70%, which is first time in university, first person in family university, 70% of them are from rural areas. Which also
70% of the 70%.
Exactly, 70% of the 70%. So, we also know one of the big problems of China. It's also something that it's a lot of planning to try to tackle. That is the difference, the gap between rural and urban areas. This is a big deal, as we know. So, I mean, you see this data is like, okay, there's something happening. There's something moving. And even like if you see some of the articles, is interesting because it's also it's complicated. It's not easy. For instance, for a kid coming from rural area, just come study, I don't know, in Chongqing or in Shanghai. It's also hard. There's adaptations. There's like a lot of stories you can see here in the media, also showing this like it's a hardship. It's not easy to do that. But anyway, but something's moving. And this is, I think, most of the things that we've been discussing and try to bring is also in the sense of show that there's like it's a very changing society, very fast, but also, of course, there's a lot of plan. There's a lot of like, okay, we have a plan, we have a planification, how to do that, and this issue of thinking 15 years from now, 20 years from now, this is something that for us in Latin America and Africa, I mean, you just don't do that. So just one more thing about this education and also the role of science and technology in society, which is also critical. I mean, you don't develop a society without a lot of innovation, a lot of science technology in nowadays capitalism. So also one interesting thing that came out last year was that for the first time ever in China, the average wage of a scientific researcher and the IT people, like software, telecommunications, the techies, for the first time, both salaries, average salaries, were higher than the salaries in the finance market. So this is huge. This is huge because, I mean, imagine this is saying that, okay, the society is going to, what is it called? Is going to prioritize science and technology rather than finance market, which is exactly the opposite what happens in the country that we cannot talk about today. But there one country that like thousands of engineers are trained every year. They came out of the university, they look at the market and say, okay, I can be an engineer. I can make, I don't know, like $100,000 a year if I go to
Wall Street.
A street that rhymes with Ball Street. a street that rhymes with Ball Street.
Yes. If I go to the rhyming Ball Street, I can make $500,000 in my first year. I'm going to know that. So, but you don't develop a country in a society only based on finance market. So this is one of the main, I mean, one of the great stories. I think we discussed this a lot here.
I mean, if you're going to compare it to Western development, I think one thing to just put some historical context is like 1949, Foundation of the People's Republic of China. You have like 80% illiteracy.
Yeah.
95% of like people in the rural areas were illiterate. So, I mean, within 70 years, you have 70% of the 70% going to university from the rural areas. That is we can't compare it in the same kind of development as Western industrial societies that haven't had to face 95% illiteracy 70 years ago in the countryside. So, I mean, that is impressive when you put it in kind of a historical context of what it means. I mean, there's another thing too. One of the stories we published is around women in education. One of last year, I mean, just 100 years ago, there were no women in universities. The first women to go were in Peking University or Beijing University. And last year, it was ranked as called the Global Gender Gap Study. China was number one in terms of gender equality in higher education. Yeah. I mean, these are kinds of advances that you almost want to say it's like leapfrogging, but 100 years ago, there's not a woman in university, and now you have more women in university actually than men. And then thinking also about what is the prioritization of, what sectors, that kind of income that they can get, but also in a broader, like who's going to university? It's people from the countryside too, people going in for the first time. It's really impressive on the education front.
Yeah.
Yeah, and a lot of these people, I mean, the villages are being developed up really nicely. And some of these people are going to go back to their villages and make contributions towards their villages. I know my wife's village in Jiangxi, very remote. All paved, like since the time I've arrived in China, I've seen it continually improve, all paved roads. Most people are still using well water, which is sufficient. But now there was I think they announced like last week, they've got, water systems that are going to be coming and running through. And now her family wants to re-renovate their old home and maybe start using it a bit more. So you're going to start to see all of the benefits that the cities have reaped from this brain power starting to go back to the villages also. Right now, it's mostly been government-led, but it's creating a really interesting ecosystem where things will start to shift and in favor of some of the villages as well.
Yeah, I mean, go.
Yeah, no, go ahead. If you had something to add, I was going to see what other topics we had, because this has almost become exclusively a poverty alleviation
it's true.
Video,
true.
But that's okay. I'm okay with that because it's a huge topic and it's really interesting what's going on. And our hopes, obviously on a personal level, is that other countries could start to emulate or make as much progress as China has in this same category. But if you had something to add, yeah, definitely.
Just maybe sort of wrapping up then this topic, but moving beyond poverty alleviation, it's also the fact. I mean, we're talking about education and how much there's a plan for changing like millions of people's lives, giving access to higher education, and of course better salaries, better life conditions. So for instance, now they just the government just announced the next 5-year plan, the 14th 5-year plan, which is going to be from 2021 to 25. And one of the key issues, it's this new strategy of so-called the dual circulation. I'm not going to go deep with this because it's like also a big topic, but just one element of this is that in this plan, which actually one of the main aspects is to strengthen the internal market of China, and even, I mean, China is a huge exporter, and this year because of the pandemic is even bigger. But they feel, of course, we have to also strengthen the internal market, which means people needs more income to get more capacity of consumption. So, for instance, one of the plans, I mean, and when they set a plan, they really do it. You better do it. You better do it. Otherwise, it's not. I mean, it's a very
somebody's going to be in trouble.
Exactly. It's people's lives. Don't mess with people's lives. Come on. So they said right now China is. I mean, they have 400 million people considered like middle class. And so the plan is to reach 560 million in the next 5 years. So this is a lot. This is almost one Brazil. There's 160 million more. Brazil is 210 million. So, but this will create for sure like a huge transformation in Chinese society in the next 5 years. And again, this is very much related to education, how to guarantee access to people and how you transform lives of people. So let's see. But this is going to be really like a new leap in Chinese society, and of course, I mean, it's going to be good for many other countries as well.
I mean, the other big topic, I mean, I guess poverty alleviation just lumps into so many things. You bring in education, you bring in, questions of consumption, state planning, that kind of thing. But big topic we're going to go into is around some of the environmental gains of not just the last year, but some of the commitments made. And so the first one, the big thing is that China, pledges carbon neutrality by 2060 with a peak set to meet the peak, so the peak carbon emissions just before 2030. So that's still in a few years. So, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, the country we will not name just recently re-signed into the Paris Accord, but we know that that making a pledge like this is pretty significant in this moment. So why is that? Because I think China already gained a sort of fame to say, oh, the development, the modernization has come at a huge cost to the environment.
Just like it has for any country that goes through modernization, which is an important point.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. I mean, what's interesting to note, I mean, that hasn't reached its peak. It shows that, what stage of development China still is. It didn't enter, it can't compete, like I was saying, with comparing education or literacy levels with the West. It's gone through a process of modernization. It's still going through that process. Whereas, European or Western industrial societies reached their peak in the 70s. And what have they done with their peak? They have 50 years ahead of industrial development, and they're pledging 2050. Mm-hmm. So, why I think it's also interesting is like that China hasn't been hiding the fact that it's come at an environmental cost. This to be a factory of the world means there was a real cost in the workers of China as well as the environment of China and the world. So they know full well the dependency on coal. As much as they're decreasing that dependency, it's still like over 40%. 58%
of the energy comes from
coal. Yeah. And Mark will talk more about some of the developments with renewable energy and everything like that. But I think so to make that commitment, knowing that they haven't even peaked, knowing that their economy is still quite reliant on coal, is a pretty big factor because, actually last week, talking about water contamination, it's not quite about global, the climate change question. But last week we published a story about how 100 million people in China were drinking contaminated water in the south and southeast regions of China. And then, you see that, wow, that's an appalling figure. Of course, we want people to have safe drinking water. But then you start looking into it's these they're called PFAs, certain kinds of chemicals that come particularly from like pesticides manufacturers and textiles and many industries. But where are some of these industries from? Like the story, as you said, in many countries in the global south, as the kind of environmental awareness, or as the Western industrial society was kind of shipping out, or let's say exporting their industries, which means also exporting their pollution to the global south, and China took a big hit in that, it means that the water was polluted. So many of these were actually industries coming from the West, relocated to China, polluting the waters, and has a huge consequence because the
regulations there are tied to say, okay, let's go to China.
Go there, and then we will say, now we will attack and say, okay, why don't you care about the environment? Why are you polluting? Why are you not providing drinking water to the world? So that being said, I mean, is that making this commitment is one of the most impressive things. We think basically every commitment that China has made so far on the environmental front has been pretty much achieved even earlier than planned.
Yeah. Sorry, what I was going to say, one of the hopes I also have in regards to this is because one of the things that sticks out in my mind is that when you have really resource-rich countries, and that's their main draw, you don't really see too much manufacturing going on there. Like if you look at sub-Saharan Africa, they were kind of promised that, just focus on mining these resources and things like that. This is what's going to make you rich, but it doesn't. If they were actually manufacturing it into a final product, that's where they could have really lifted their society up. And you can look at it with the numbers in terms of sub-Saharan Africa, in terms of the percentage of the world's raw materials that come from there, yet the percentage of the global GDP that they make up is minuscule. There's definitely an imbalance there. But what you're seeing with China is that they are going in and setting up joint manufactories and stuff like that. So I hope, and I don't know if they're doing this, but I hope that what they're going to do is take everything they've learned from industrializing in China and start out at a higher starting point when they're going to these countries also. That's something hopefully we can look forward to as well. But I think it's important to keep in mind the context that you're talking about also, about these foreign countries sending requirements over here, their work over here, their factories over here, or their production over here at least. And when you look at the speed that China's caught up with everything, from the moment they industrialized to the moment that they started saying, this is a really important priority to us, I don't think there's any other industrialized nation that had it happen in that short span of a time.
No, I mean, if you think about, okay, let's take reforming, opening up 1978 as a year of transformation. So now they are pledging to have the peak of carbon emissions in 2030, which means this is like 52 years from like almost from the scratch to like the peak, and 2060 the carbon neutrality, which means they're still gonna have emissions, but they will compensate with other mechanisms. Like natural resources, etc., forestation. So this is huge. This is very, very fast.
And I mean, this is, well, a huge amount of global significance. One of the stories we published, it was actually from the Guardian, but one of the climate experts was saying this will actually cut up to 0.3 degrees off of the climate, like global warming. I mean, that's a significant amount, but that would require 90% emissions reductions.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing is, what we've seen, I mean, just last year and the last years of what has been investments in renewables, and also what they've done to kind of, let's say, restore, whether it's forests, the problem of desertification, issues of water, issues of air. So it's kind of this dual method of how to address it. In this Guardian article, the expert was saying, I think China will achieve it. We'll be able to achieve 90% reductions to get to 2060 carbon.
Well, the other positive too is that with them prioritizing scientists and researchers, if there is some sort of carbon capture technology that is invented and deployed, there's a high likelihood that it would come from here as well. Especially if this is such an important goal for them, they're going to throw all their resources at this. I mean, I have no idea what will be invented, but I have a lot of optimism that there's going to be some pretty good environmental technologies that come out of here with this kind of a prioritization.
No, absolutely. I mean, you can see already that, like, even in terms of, for instance, like the wind plants, wind energy, solar energy plants. China has already 1/3 of the solar panels and the turbines of the world. 1/3. So, for instance, like this week, actually, we are publishing an article
tomorrow.
Tomorrow, yes. So, take a look. Actually, in the last year, China doubled its capacity of produce both solar and wind energy. Doubled in the last year. So that's really, really big. And even like maybe you can talk about more because you were in Shenzhen, where, if I'm not wrong, like all the cabs and the buses are electric. So China has 50% of the electric vehicles of the planet right now, and 98% of the electric buses, and many, I think probably the majority of them, are in Shenzhen. I don't know, maybe you talk a lot about
I think you're probably right. All of the buses have gone to electric, the local buses. If they're long distance buses, they're still regular fuel, but you don't see them in the city that much. And it's just been amazing. I mean, you've seen a noticeable difference there's fewer smog days. There's hardly any now. I mean, I remember when I was first here in 2008, which is interesting too, because 2008, 2009, I remember seeing somebody interviewing students in Shanghai, university students, and they're asking what's their biggest worries about the future. And they were saying that the environment. They said they're very, very worried about the environment. They see the situation with what industry in China is doing to the environment. And I wasn't really, back then, I wasn't very sure about how the government works here and everything like that. So my assumption was, how are these voices going to be heard? Because it's not a democracy here. How is this going to get up to the top and say that this is what kids really care about now? And I remember being frustrated by it too, saying, because, this is a serious issue. And sure enough, the government has listened, whether it's they listen to the new generation saying this is something that the new generation cares about, or on their own they say, yeah, of course, this is something we should care about. They started putting these things in place. So Shenzhen, I think, was a test city, 100% local electric buses, which has reduced the noise pollution as well. Like those old buses, they were pretty noisy. Noise pollution has gone down. All the taxis are electric now, and now I'm starting to see dump trucks, massive dump trucks going to the. We're not talking little pickup trucks. Massive dump trucks that are 100% electric going to the construction sites also. And when you compare it to other cities that have these goals, it's like by 2050, we hope to have 10% of our buses, electric or something like that. And it's like, wow, it's like miles away from what anybody else is doing in countries that we won't mention.
It's true. Just one technical thing. I don't know, maybe we can cut, but I think the audio now, it's a little bit choppy.
Okay. Well, I'm hearing you guys. No. I'm hearing you fine. So if you guys want to continue on with some of the other stories that you want to talk about in the meantime, while maybe my connection is stabilizing here, then guys can go ahead if you had any other topics you'd like to touch on.
Yeah, it's actually just also sort of wrapping up this one, because, I mean, so first, of course, we have the issue of these new technologies, new energy sources, which is amazing. Also, you can see in the video, so China is also not only doing this, but because they had the best technology, the most advanced and the cheaper technology, they're also exporting to many countries. You see in the video, the project in Argentina. Argentina has the biggest solar panel plant in Latin America now, which is actually, funded and also constructed by Chinese companies. But there's also one other aspect that Tings was talking about, but there's interesting data, because, okay, you need, of course, in the future, you need different sources, but you also need to restore what was damaged. And it's true. I mean, this is just, we live in Shanghai, come on. The air is heavy. It's heavy. There's some days it's just like, oh my God, this is too much. And they know that. And then, this is not a secret for anyone, but so they're working a lot. For instance, like since 2000, because one of the also important things is to do reforestations, like to plant trees and create new green areas in the countries. So China, from this data is from NASA.
Yeah.
So it's not from the Chinese spatial agency anyway. So according to the satellites of NASA, since 2000, China was responsible for 25% of the new green areas in the planet. 1/4, just China doing. And so this is, and again, as Tings was saying, when China says, okay, the carbon neutrality, this is not only about China, this is about the planet. And I just want to finalize that saying that one of the things, I'm from Brazil. So Brazil, it's a huge exporter of soy to China. Last year, we exported like 60 million tons of soy to China. It's a lot. It's U.S. and Brazil is the biggest two. Oh, sorry. The country in the north.
No, it's okay. We're actually just kidding around when we say it, but it's fun. It's fun to mention it because actually some of my stuff does get demonetized if I speak too negatively about one country and too positively about another. But it's okay.
So this country, they also produce a lot of soy. It's good. It's good for China. China eats soy. But anyway, so for instance, it's a common sense in my country, and this is what I, before coming here and started like thinking more like globally. There's one common sense in our country is that, oh, that's terrible. Brazil, it's producing soy to China, and we are destroying our forests. Yeah, there's a lot of problem indeed in Brazil because of that. And this is not because of China, but this is because also the way the soy is produced, how the agribusiness work in my country. So there's a lot of things going on. But there's one principle that in the common sense is just like, oh, it's an absurd. How can Brazil produce soy to feed China? We say, okay, but how can the working class in China produce cheap and nice cell phones, televisions, cars, everything to the Brazilians? So, okay, we want the cell phones from China. but we don't want to have nothing to do with feeding the working class that are producing our cell phones. So, I mean, this is a global issue. So this is, I think it's also something very interesting about if you see the last speeches of Chinese government about environment. I mean, everybody knows you cannot deal with this issue. It is not one country. This is the planet issue. This is like a global discussion, a global debate, global actions. Because we are, I mean, we are absolutely attached. Of course, there's a lot of discussions. I mean, okay, Brazil export soy and just get like electronics. It's not so good for Brazil in the long term. But right now, you cannot just say, oh, that's absurd. We don't want to feed the pigs of China. Okay, so who is going to produce your cell phone, buddy? I mean, they are Chinese working class.
Yeah, and what are those farmers going to do who are benefiting from producing this product that's being exported as well? I mean, these are creating jobs for people. I mean, maybe there's another element. I don't know if there's a part of the argument where people are perhaps concerned if there's deforestation going on in order to support soy. I'm not sure if that's something. So that's probably an issue that people need to work through. But generally speaking, I mean, supporting the agricultural industry. I mean, that doesn't sound like a negative, like an overwhelmingly negative thing to do. So,
I mean, those are mostly the stories we want to present today.
Yeah.
I mean, there's so much more we could talk about. We could go on for hours, but I don't know.
Yeah, we could. Well, let's save some of the other stuff because we've got a few ideas that we're gonna work on together. Whether we do an ongoing summary of some of the stories you're covering, some of the things you're thinking about and looking into, it'd be cool to talk on a regular basis. And then we have some more off-topic stuff that might get a little bit more political, but we have an interesting episode coming up where we're going to talk about the experiences of you being quarantined in China versus quarantine procedures in Brazil versus the U.S. and versus Cuba. We're going to have somebody on who was quarantined in Cuba in relation to COVID control mechanisms. And there's some really interesting things we spoke about while you were down here in Shenzhen before you headed back up to Shanghai. So that's going to be something we talk about as well. But in the meantime, let's before I just re-mention your channel names and everything like that, how about we wrap up with your most recent summary video that was on YouTube. So I'll play that for us now. I love these videos. I love them. They're so well put together. So for everybody who wants to see more of that, it is on your YouTube channel. The channel name, how is it typed out? The channel name?
It's Dongsheng, Dongsheng.
Okay, Dongsheng. So you can find some of this work. Yeah, and the website. Yeah, let's just actually let's do a quick look. I'll show them what the newsletter website looks like if I can pull it up here.
And also for, I mean, of course, your audience is an English speaker, but you have friends that speak another language who's also publishing in Portuguese, Spanish, Italian, French, and Arabic, and probably soon we're gonna have more languages adding.
Nice. That's great. Okay, I see the language options here. So people can subscribe to your newsletter here, or they can go into the actual details of each newsletter from here. I think probably the email option is quite probably better. It's very convenient. And then let's see here. News details. Let's click on the last one, number 36. This is what people are going to see. So you've got your summary video, and then this is where everybody can go down and see some of the sources for your news, or they can look at the data and go into a little bit more detail. I'm not sure if that's scrolling down for you on your screen. Are you
No,
seeing
not
that?
for us.
Okay, yeah. So further down, it basically goes into all the details and has the links to articles and things like that. It's nicely put together. But yeah, so no, this was fun. I'm really looking forward to some of our future conversations, especially the one about quarantine. But if you guys had anything else you wanted to finish on, I guess we're going to wrap it up from here.
No, I mean, I think thanks for having us on the show. We'd love to chat more with you and everything like that. One thing we wanted to just announce is actually, if people can see it on the last, on our website, dongshengnews.org, is that today we're launching a short, like a supplement on Africa-China stories. So every week we're going to have about 3 extra stories focused on that question, because I think it's a question that many of us have. Like, what is the relationship? What is China really doing in Africa? And so we're working with some friends, some colleagues who are based there, who are reading the news a lot, and we're collaborating on that. So I would encourage people to check that out as well.
It's launching
That's
today,
excellent.
actually, in a few hours.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's excellent. And then we will have, we'll have some future chats. Maybe one in person we can do next time you're down in Shenzhen. That was a fun. That was a fun visit. You have your glasses there, don't you? There we go. You took some high-level Wumao glasses. That's awesome. Yeah, no, it's fun. Okay, well, thanks a lot, guys. And we will see everybody else on the next chat together. Take care.
Great. Thanks, Daniel.